Full disclosure, I won a grant from DFINITY. In an attempt to educate the public on ICP, none of this should be taken as financial advice.
Growth has failed on its own terms. You can't have infinite growth in a world of finite resources.
And do other things too, like enable smart contracts to serve interactive web content directly to users so that you can get complete end-to-end decentralization. It would be necessary to rethink blockchain from the ground up, firstly, rethink the architecture, and secondly, develop a lot of novel cryptography, which is why we employ so many cryptographers. And we said about that, obviously, it's a very big, major technical undertaking. And that's why it's taken so long. But it does work very nicely. I mean, at the core of it is something called chain key cryptography that makes it possible to run lots of what we call subnet blockchains that are able to combine themselves into a single blockchain.
Crypto assets are a sophisticated Excel sheet. And what that means is everyone's account, everyone's assets are tracked on this Excel sheet or this ledger that has truth baked into it, a system of checks and balances to make sure whatever's on the Excel sheet is truth. When the XRP ledger came along and Ethereum came along, they added logic to the Excel sheet. So each account, if this happens, that happens. They're able to add programming into the accounts, into the assets. And this is where escrow comes in, tokenization comes in. Those advancements took crypto to the next level. Now, ICP represents a new paradigm. They create subnetworks, and what they are a bunch of computers that have specific hardware requirements. And these bunch of computers get together from the beginning to make up a decentralized application or a dApp. Now, the decentralized application is just one application. So you have a subnetwork for one application, and you're able to store data. You're able to store processing power. It has the ledger capability, so the same thing as Bitcoin and Ethereum and XRP, but you're able to bring data on chain. You're able to have a cloud computer that's decentralized from the very beginning, a decentralized computer that's on the internet. Now, the developers pay for the tokens to host their decentralized application. So that means that the user doesn't have to worry about gas fees. They don't have to worry about too much, and the developers take the brunt of that. So this means that decentralized applications need to be profitable for these dApps to last. Now, this also means that it's infinitely scalable because each subnetwork is its own blockchain within a larger global blockchain. And this means that you're able to have an infinitely scalable network.
With the popular DeFi protocol, the actual interface you're using as an average consumer is not decentralized or tamper-proof, and it's not sort of resilient in the way that the underlying DeFi protocol's financial logic is resilient, right? And no single party could sort of alter that logic. So we have like this nice hybrid today, and I think we've made a lot of progress. But the next step is making the application that the user is consuming also open source, not just the underlying financial logic.
DeFi, DEXs, and even NFTs, all of the data is stored in centralized services. So if I wanted to use Uniswap or Sologenic or any of these platforms, the actual website, the interface that faces me, that's hosted on centralized platforms. If I wanted to download Xamin, the wallet Xamin, or if I wanted to download MetaMask, I have to go to a centralized website and then download it off the Play Store, download it off of the website. And with Internet Computer Protocol, you can have those files directly on a blockchain. So no government can say, we want you to shut down Uniswap. They can't go to a web service platform and serve them a cease and desist order because the whole website is decentralized. The exe file that sits on Xamin's website or Xum's website, that file, the government could put a cease and desist order that we want you to remove that file, and they would have to do it. So there's all these vulnerabilities. NFTs, for example, are not a JPEG that's stored on a blockchain. It's a JPEG stored on AWS, on Azure, any of those things, and the NFT is just a link to that file.
The national standard strategy pointed to digital assets and digital identity infrastructure and other types of technologies that are critical building blocks for the future of digital economies as a national security priority for the United States. Standards don't get built by government out of nothing and based on nothing. They get built based on industry coming together and creating a cohesive understanding of what the standardized best practices are. So this bringing together some of the most innovative minds who have been disruptors and disrupted historically to really understand those best practices and to figure out what are the ways forward on the areas that require standardization on policy, on operations, on technology. Those are some of the key themes.
There has been recent executive orders to push blockchain technology because the government recognizes the huge threat that cyber actors play. With the Keystone Pipeline, as well as other massive hacks that have gone down in the last few years, we need to restructure our internet. ICP has the capability of HTTPS requests, which means that you're able to host entire websites on Internet Computer Protocol. You have complete interoperability with HTTPS. The entire internet is being transformed by blockchain technology, from identity to decentralized data. All of this stuff is going to amalgamate into a new form of internet.
They don't understand that when they hear built on Solana, built on this, built on that, they actually think it is built on the blockchain. They don't realize that it's built on Amazon Web Services. That's where the user experience comes from. That's where the data lives. That's where the data processing happens. It's just tokens and NFTs. And even the NFT is a token which has a reference to content that actually typically is also, on the cloud too. So, and even the blockchains themselves run on the bloody cloud. Like the internet computer is created a bit like Bitcoin using this thing called proof of useful work, but obviously a different system, but it's dedicated hardware. Like independent parties own these things called node machines, which are built to a public spec, and these things can be combined together by the protocol, and contribute essentially to scaling out the internet computer blockchain. But otherwise, everyone just runs these proof of stake blockchains, and they say it's decentralized because they have all these validators. But it's running on, like, in reality, like 2 or 3 big tech cloud platforms. Right? It's not centralized. Like, the other day, Hetzner, the big cloud in Europe, said, "Hey, we don't want any more Solana validators. They're too chatty, using up bandwidth and compute resources." And they pressed a button, and 40% of Solana's network went offline. More than 1,000 validators, which is the perfect illustration of how, even if, look at Ethereum, 500,000 validators, they celebrated it. But, if all your validators are running on Amazon Web Services and Google and Hetzner, that's not really like that's not decentralization. That's just people replicating data and computation on one platform. And, Hetzner said, we don't want these Solana validators anymore. It's against our terms of service to run a Bitcoin client on the Hetzner network. They literally ran a script, identified all the Hetzner nodes, pressed a button, and they all went offline in a puff of smoke.
Subnetworks are formed to create these decentralized applications. A user will stake their ICP tokens, lock their ICP tokens, and then they form a DAO that controls the application, the decentralized application or subnet. Now, these subnets each have a vote on the network nervous system, which is ICP's global governance system. So each application is a vote on the entire chain.
But the biggest problem, I think, is security. Think about like a year and a half ago, the Colonial Pipeline hack in America involved hackers putting ransomware on all these machines that controlled that infrastructure, and the oil stopped flowing from Texas to the petroleum refineries on the eastern seaboard, and the petroleum ran out, and there were these huge tailbacks at gas stations and so on. You can't run the world on this kind of flaky infrastructure that can get hacked and encrypted with ransomware and can just stop working and things like that. And there are 8 billion people in the world now, and you can't support that kind of population without huge automation using information systems, right? And people forget, you take away the computers, the vast majority of people on Earth die, right? Computers are absolutely essential today to supporting human life.
Let's say computers and bees.
Yeah, and bees. Yeah, don't get me started on that one. Like the bees disappear, we've got big problems. So it doesn't make sense that we're going to be building with this kind of old school traditional IT that really evolved from the earliest days of computerization. And my first computer had 8 kilobytes of memory. It doesn't make sense. That a lot of the way we build stuff today is, related to the way things evolved over time. It wasn't like, there was a clean piece of paper. What's the best way of devising a platform to build on? So for me, blockchain is that future platform, right? Tamper-proof, unstoppable. You have autonomous code, tokenized things. I mean, it's all these huge advantages. So for me, in the end, people won't be building on Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure or using their own servers and data centers or anything like that. People will build everything on blockchain. Blockchain will store all the data, process it, serve the user experiences. And that's what a world computer is to me.
We have made huge advancements in technology, especially in the hardware area, except the internet is working off of 1970s protocols. Now, the internet, when it was first designed, was a great invention because it was open. It was open for everybody. At first, it started off with these walled gardens, but we've taken that information, we've expanded on it, and ICP is just an iteration of that. As critical infrastructure is taken offline and hackers are at the nation state level, we're seeing sophisticated hacks that all could be prevented using blockchain technology. The president is pushing out executive orders to explore blockchain technology. You see, the SEC is just one small jurisdiction inside of the government. The rest of the government actually wants to see blockchain technologies thrive because they know the security of it.
For our industry, it'll be the first time ever our industry saw a significant decline in developer activity. You can see the stats there on that bar chart on the left. We've seen a significant amount of developers leave the industry as a whole, but we kept pushing forward. I like this. I like that little astronaut moving through because we're moving forward. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that while we have not necessarily gained as many developers as we did in 2022 and 2021. Given the context of the industry, we remained pretty flat. You can see the first half of this year on that line chart to the left. The first half, we maybe lost a little bit of developers, but we're starting to make that back in the second half. And we're going to, looks like, end the year on plus 30% developer growth. And that's mostly driven by part-time developers, but part-time developers tend to be a leading indicator for full-time. It's basically a sign that the industry is healing and that more developers are exploring coming back in. Throughout all of 2023, we've really been moving up across all the ecosystems, the crypto ecosystems. We've been moving up. We're usually around like number 7 in terms of our ranking. And then in terms of repos, the total number of repos, we're now in the top 5. So you can see the number of open GitHub repos has increased 56% this year.
Professional VCs, professional crypto investors, the number one metric that they pay attention to is developer activity. ICP is in the top 5 repos. So when you set up a GitHub account, GitHub is kind of like a social media for developers where they can share code. ICP is in the top 5 in repos. So they have the most activity in the repo, the top 5 repos. The other aspect is part-time developers. So the whole industry took a big hit when prices fell with Bitcoin. Now they're starting to climb up. And ICP is one that's climbing up the quickest with part-time developers, but part-time developers later turn into full-time developers.
New cryptography framework inside the internet computer to directly integrate with Bitcoin. Essentially, that's going to add smart contracts to Bitcoin. So smart contracts on the internet computer will have their own native balances of Bitcoin, and they'll be able to send and receive Bitcoin that move on the Bitcoin blockchain. But there's no wrapping, there's no bridge. This is direct integration using chain key cryptography that allows smart contracts to control balances of Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain without having private keys. And this is, I think, going to be absolutely huge because there's around $1 trillion of liquidity on Bitcoin now. And so I think combining that with internet computer smart contracts without a bridge, without any need for trusting someone to run this wrapping process, and we know that that can go wrong. And just recently, I think it's the Poly network got hacked for $600 million, and this was a kind of bridge between Polymatic and Ethereum and Bitcoin and so on. So we're getting rid of the need for bridges using this chain key cryptography. So that's going to be revolutionary and hugely exciting. We also want to do the same thing and integrate with Ethereum so that smart contracts on the internet computer can call smart contracts on Ethereum and vice versa, again, without a bridge. So that would enable, for example, DeFi systems on Ethereum to, for example, create user experiences on the internet computer and completely decentralize. One of the problems today is that dApps on Ethereum can't fully decentralize. So, Uniswap recently had to delist about half the tokens. NFT dApps on Ethereum constantly getting these DCMA takedown notices. And the challenge is that, you have to run the website for these dApps on Amazon Web Services or some other cloud or a CERN.
ICP also works with the XRP ledger. You see, ICP can work with any crypto asset. Now, there are certain crypto assets that work better with ICP, but there is a roadmap to make sure that all crypto assets work with Internet Computer Protocol. Bridges are the number one reason why many of the DeFi platforms get hacked. Now, with ICP, what you're doing is taking a private key and distributing them across a subnetwork. And the entire subnetwork needs to agree to reconstruct the key. So this is a more secure way of bridging crypto assets. Most bridges are vulnerable to hacking. And this happens because the developer set up a multi-sig wallet and the multi-sig has vulnerabilities. But with ICP, there's a new form of bridging, and this form of bridging is much more secure.
And even sometimes there, in order to interact with the blockchain, in this example here, maybe Ethereum, people rely on like single third parties to allow that access, because it's very hard to interact directly with Ethereum. So in the case of Ethereum, that most people actually using Fora to figure out whether some tokens have been transacted or not. You see, there's already a very complex architecture. There's many points of failures here. And you would say, well, as user, I don't care. I mean, as long as it works, I can install it. It's all fine. The problem is that really doesn't work. And there's like a lot of places where this already has gone wrong. So, for instance, the Google Chrome Store or Web Store did ban MetaMask already twice. And in both cases, of course, the users could no longer access their dApp. Another example is also that, of course, the cloud could delete data. So, for instance, Amazon also decided to ban Parler, which was like a social media service. Or BatchDAO got hacked. Their Cloudflare account got hacked, and that ended up in like 130 million of users with their funds being lost.
You see, the beauty behind public blockchains, open protocols, crypto assets is that people contribute to the network. So these subnets that are using advanced computers are using computers that are accessible to retail, you and I. So when you create a subnet, we don't have to cap people's threshold on computational power, and they could still use the subnet. Big tech, the big cloud computing software, they're going to be the ones that cap people's computational power under executive orders.
And it turns out that there's a whole host of reasons why the decentralized architecture is better for the user. One is sort of counterparty risk and trust. So when you're executing a trade in a decentralized exchange, there's pros and cons. In general, the cost is a bit higher because you need all the nodes to validate that trade. But you sort of have high uptime guarantees. For example, your account, so to speak, can't get shut down or frozen because you're interacting directly with the protocol, not with a centralized service provider who may have other interests, or maybe doesn't like the way you're using the platform or something like that. So you don't have any of that platform risk. Also, all of the software is open source and replicable, forkable. So you can copy paste all of that logic and extend it. So whatever, you like about a particular decentralized exchange or decentralized lending pool, if you have a tweak that you want to make, you can actually copy paste the whole thing and relaunch it with that tweak. What that means is, because you have the ability for any developer in the world to press play and launch a new application, you have an incredible pace of innovation, right? It's all open source. It's really, really accessible. It's hard to go register a company and get regulatory licensure and go out and launch a crypto exchange. Relatively speaking, it's much, much easier to just press play and deploy a decentralized exchange protocol. So the pace of innovation is massive.
The number one advantage that I see with ICP is that most crypto assets are focused on financial applications, but when everything is open source, you can make better and better products. And it just takes a developer to copy, paste, and edit some of the source code. ICP's capability is vast. It can host things like decentralized chat, decentralized email, decentralized AI. The list goes on and on. Since its capability is like a computer, you can really build anything that's on the internet, but better.
We're probably the biggest R&D operation in blockchain, which is a little known fact. We have a team of just over 200 people. We employ several of the world's top cryptographers. DFINITY, I first started talking about DFINITY back in 2015.
I rarely hear arguments about ICP's tech. Most of the time it has to do with how it was launched, how much it launched for, and in my opinion, those are bad arguments because I want to buy assets that are cheap and sell them when they're high. ICP came out at the peak of the bull run. There was a lot of excitement and exuberance. Not to mention there's some rumblings that this had to do with FTX. FTX purposely made the price really high to cover some of their losses. I don't know. It's irrelevant to me. I believe in the actual protocol. I believe in the amount of developers that tell me it's super easy to develop on ICP. It's easier to develop on ICP than it is with AWS. I was told by one developer that in order to use AWS, you have to learn AWS, and that's a bad model. So if we're able to bring down the cost of everything to these decentralized networks and they're able to compete with the larger scale networks, I think ICP is one of the better protocols for this. And I think with the amount of developers, so they have some of the best working for DFINITY, they have some of the best using the technology, and that's what I care about. Economics become redundant if it can rationalize an exchange that sells the future of humankind. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and add a comment. If you enjoy work like this, please consider joining my Patreon or my Ghost site, dmjr.ghost.io or patreon.com/fame21more.